Indian Country Today, FNX Television, California Complete Count, Ethnic Media Studies, Culture Story, the National Congress of American Indians, and more organizations joined at the Pala Band of Mission Indians Resort and Casino for a roundtable discussion about the 2020 census.
Hi, I'm Jessica Imatachi. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and I live and work here in Los Angeles as a tribal partnership coordinator for the U.S. Census Bureau. We have a lot at stake in Indian country as it relates to the census. The census is primarily about representation, and so of course, we as Native people want to make sure that we do have adequate representation, but also there's a lot of funding at stake. Over $675 billion in federal funds annually is distributed across local governments, including tribal governments. And we know in Indian country, we are already stretching pennies to dollars, and we don't want to leave anything on the table. It's really critical for our communities and for our tribal members.
Gamadum Ventif. My name is Licia Maddox. I am the Vice President of External Affairs at the National Congress of American Indians, and I'm also a citizen of the Quechan Indian Nation.
Wonderful. And can you tell me a little bit about why the census is important to your organization and to Indian country?
Absolutely. So civic engagement is baked into the foundations of the National Congress of American Indians, beginning with the first voting rights resolution that we passed back in the 1940s. And working on our Indian Country Count census campaign just shows our commitment to making sure that we get a full and accurate count in Indian country.
And what are some of the unique projects and ways that NCAI is making sure that Indian country gets a full and accurate account?
Sure. So back in April 1st of 2019, we launched our Indian Country Counts campaign, and we made sure that we launched alongside the Bureau because we find partnerships and collaboration very important when we're doing efforts this large. And we wanted to make sure that we were resourcing Indian country to ensure that they knew what the census was, what it looked like, the importance of it, and where to find resources. And we also launched a pledge campaign because during our 2018 message testing, we learned some messages that really would resonate with Indian country, and we found that our people, our nations, and our future were a couple of terms that resonated really well. And so with our pledge campaign, we wanted to make sure that tribal communities were able to represent their tribal nation on their shirts, and so I'm wearing a shirt today from the pledge campaign where you can go on our IndianCountryCounts.org website. You can agree to do any of the pledge things that are on our forms or make up your own, and then in return we send you a free shirt with your tribal nation on it. Alongside that, we are going out and doing regional meetings so that we can teach our tribal communities how to use the resources that we have for them. We're documenting their events. We also host bi-weekly phone calls and webinars with our coalition of tribal liaisons, tribal citizens that are activating their communities, and tribal nations that want to talk about the importance in their community, what they can do next, best practice sharing. And so it's just a couple of things that we've been doing over the past year, and we're really ready. We're ready to hit the ground running, and we are going to ramp up our efforts with making sure that we're providing more technical assistance to these groups over the next month.
Those are really creative ways you're engaging Indian country. And please speak more about the technical assistance that you're providing tribal citizens. I know that there are access issues, whether it's broadband or transportation. How are you as NCAI mitigating that?
Sure. So part of our Indian Country Counts program was to make sure that we were putting resources, including funding, into communities. And so we launched a mini grants program, and we distributed almost $500,000 into tribal communities and tribal focused organizations so that they could go out into their communities and do things like show people what the form would look like, show people what enumerators would be wearing, talk about the history of the census, talk about what the form would look like and how their tribal nation wants to be listed on the form. And so those are a couple of the different ways, as well as deploying our NCAI staff out onto the ground in the different regions within our country. We've also partnered with Alaska Federation of Natives, and they've already worked in more than 180 villages, which is super fantastic. Shout out to AFN and Nicole Borromeo out there. Such great partners. And that's one of the things that we've learned the most about this campaign. It's about the collaboration and it's about the partnerships, because our tribal citizens, our tribal leaders, they're all the trusted messengers within the communities, and their voice is going to resonate the most.
Given that Native people oftentimes have access issues to whether it's internet or transportation, can you tell me a little bit about the steps that are being taken in order to mitigate these access issues?
So you complete your census form either online, which is probably the most convenient if you are in an area that has good broadband, good internet connectivity. You can also complete it by phone, or there is still the traditional paper copy. In most reservation areas, we have what's called an update leave operation. So we actually leave a packet of information on every tribal, or on every housing unit door on the tribal reservation. If you are living in an urban area, most likely you will fall under our self-response category, where we will mail out information to that household, and then you will respond online. So for California, particularly in Central and Northern California, there are still some areas where broadband can be a challenge, and so we're working closely with those communities. We have been working closely in terms of like recruitment to make sure we hire locally from tribal reservation areas. There have been some challenges around that. We are still trying to work through that. And then I guess just making sure that we let everyone know, that we're hitting every reservation area, we're hitting every, major urban area that has a high tribal or American Indian population, to let them know that this is important regardless of whether you live on or off reservation.
And given that there's a bit of mistrust still amongst Native people and the federal government, what can you say to Native people who may feel that way, and why should they trust the Census Bureau?
So that's why we try and hire locally, and we try and hire, directly from the community, because they're able to carry that trusted voice. And we also work really closely with tribal leadership, because they're able to convey, like at the local level, like why it's particularly important to our tribe or our tribal community. I think there's no message like the local message, and so that's one thing that we really look at as important, and we want, those local voices, those trusted voices, to be the ones that convey that. And so our partnerships are everything to us for that reason.
So I think that we can all attest to the fact that there is a mistrust of the federal government, and that's because of our previous relationship with the federal government. And so as NCAI, our founding principles were to ensure that we're improving, promoting, securing, and protecting tribal sovereignty for nations, and that this is flexing that sovereignty muscle. We want to make sure that they know the most about how to, activate their tribal citizens to be counted, to be visible.
And the issues that are actually affecting California tribes and unrecognized tribes, how can the census help to make progress in those areas?
Sure. So this is a self-identification questionnaire, and it doesn't have anything to do with current applications for federal recognition. It doesn't get any more rights for tribal nations. It's simply an enumeration of people who identify as American Indian or Alaska Native. And so what it can do, though, is to ensure that one of the federal government requirements for federal recognition is to show a history and demonstrate that there is an active tribal government in place. And so if the tribal nations participate and they demonstrate they have citizenship, then it could lead to further conversations. There's no guarantee about that, but it does certainly allow those tribal nations to be visible underneath the name that their nation wants to be represented under.
More information about the 2020 census can be found at census.ca.gov, nativepeoplecountca.org, indiancountrytoday.com, and indiancountrycounts.org.